Holy City Center Radio, episode number 49, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Thank you for joining the award-winning Holy City Center Radio for another week, winner of Charleston's Best Podcast. Thank you again for the votes, and we've got another good one for you. Today's guest is Art Milligan, the president and CEO of the Charleston Housing Authority. He actually took over those roles back on January 1st, but has more than 30 years of experience leading public housing authorities over the span of his career. For a little bit of background, the Housing Authority of the City of Charleston was organized on May 5th, 1935. And they've been around since then, obviously. Their stated mission is to provide decent, safe, sanitary, and affordable housing to low and moderate income citizens of the city of Charleston. Obviously, affordable housing is something we hear about a lot here in the city. So it's a good interview to learn a little bit more about what exactly the Housing Authority does here and how they're helping out folks who need access to affordable housing. So be sure to stick around for that. But first, we are going to get into some of the biggest stories over the last week or so. Unfortunately, we can't avoid the biggest story over the last week, the horrific shooting in Uvalde, Texas, a school shooting that left 19 children and 2 teachers dead. We're recording this on Thursday, May 26th. So some of this information may change. Some, it's a very fluid situation, as all these horrible incidents are. So just keep in mind that that's when we're recording, and some things may change, some things may prove to have been inaccurate information. So I just wanted to make sure we touched on that. So for instance, one of the early stories was that there was a school resource officer that was on site. That, according to a press conference I just saw like an hour ago, there was no school resource officer on site. So that's just an example of how sometimes information is incorrect in these types of situations where there's so much chaos and you're waiting for official word to come out. I want to talk about part of it. I want to talk about how there's a story out there that, police got to the school before the gunman even got into the school and didn't really interact with him, didn't really seem to take any measures to prevent this, because they were waiting on a tactical team. So I was going to kind of go in on this, but after hearing the press conference, that might not be true either. So we're waiting on details. So again, for the most up-to-date information, check your normal news. My Twitter account, I always share stories and stuff, so I'll be posting updates as they come out. But regardless of all those types of details, there's some stuff we do know for sure and can talk about. Obviously, the biggest thing is just it's this horrible, unthinkable tragedy that unfortunately we've seen before, not just in schools. We've seen it in elementary schools before. This whole incident reminds me of Sandy Hook, which was about 10 years ago, and we see these things constantly. There's been a rash of gun mass shootings in this country over the last few weeks. We talked about the Buffalo one, and there was 2 others that same weekend. And when it involves children, it feels worse, although anybody's death is horrible, adult or otherwise. But, you think about innocent children and how confused and scary that must have been for them. And it's just, it's horrible to think about. And unfortunately, just like with shootings involving adults, it doesn't matter who's involved. The predictable responses have already started. Thoughts and prayers, blah, blah, blah. Too early to discuss solutions. It's too soon, blah, blah, blah. Typical stuff that we hear all the time. Absolutely zero action being made by most politicians and people in this country. Governor Greg Abbott, that's the Texas governor, said in a press conference on Wednesday, which was the day after the shooting, that the shooter had no history of mental illness, but then proceeded to spend a majority of the press conference discussing how this was a mental health issue. So the shooter had no known mental illness, and I know the argument that if you are someone who's going to go shoot people, kill people, especially children, there's some level of mental illness, but not enough to excuse this or write it off as that's the only problem here. But regardless, he has no history of it. But then you're going to spend the entire press conference talking about how this is a mental health issue. Oh, and by the way, even if he truly believed that, he has cut state spending for mental health services. So what is he doing here? So that's frustrating to me. this whole situation where you can see this on the news and just shrug and be like, well, it's sad, it's horrible, but what are you going to do? Do something. And I know not all of us are politicians, so we can't pass laws, but you can push for these changes. You can vote for the right people. How can some people that I've seen in this country get so worked up about protecting children, specifically children in schools, got to protect them from everything, but can't do anything here? A false assertion that kids are being taught CRT, which is a college-level theory course, ban it. Kids are learning about LGBTQ plus the community. They're learning about that in school. Ban it. Trans kids want to play sports on a team that matches their gender identity. Ban them. Kids have to wear masks in schools during a global pandemic. Ban the masks. 19 children and 2 adults are murdered by a gunman. Shrug. If you care about keeping kids safe in school and you claim to care about their well-being, how can you solely offer thoughts and prayers and refuse to take or demand any action whatsoever? And a lot of people will hear this. Well, maybe not. My listeners tend to be in the same political bend as I am, and this shouldn't be a political issue. But people might hear me say that or hear other people say that and think I'm maybe calling for like a gun ban, or I want the government to come seize your guns. And that's not it at all. It doesn't have to be a gun ban. There are lots of factors at play here. Guns is part of it. This country's obsession with violence is part of it. In some instances, mental health services may have helped in some of these circumstances. There's a lot of different things that we could look at and try to work on. But doing nothing, shrugging, is not acceptable. You don't have to agree with me about guns or whatever, and I don't have to agree with you if you have a theory as to what would help. But at least have a theory. At least want to do something. We don't have to just think, well, this is just the way that life is in America. There's no country even remotely close to us when it comes to mass shootings, let alone mass shootings of children in schools. We have triple-digit mass shootings, at least triple digits, every single year. Triple digits in schools sometimes. The next closest country is like single digits. Why is it? It's not video games. It's not music. Video games and music is available in all these other countries, the same exact stuff. Literally everything can be the same in a country, and they do not have this problem that we have. So this isn't an unsolvable way of life thing that we just can't do anything about. Again, not calling for a ban of guns or for people to seize your guns, but something. Is it like, what is the point of people having assault style rifles? Like, do we need these guns? What is the point of them? Maybe you disagree and think I should have my guns. Okay. But instead of just arguing that's not the right course of action, suggest something. Politicians too, you hear them, oh, thoughts and prayers, but gun bans aren't going to work. Expanded background checks aren't going to work. But they don't offer something else. They'll just say this stuff won't work, which a lot of the times isn't true based on other countries and the fact that we used to have a ban on like AR-15 style guns in this country until that expired not too long ago. And lo and behold, almost all of these mass shootings include that type of gun. So it has worked before. But even putting that aside, even if you vehemently deny it and think the Second Amendment is there should be no limits whatsoever. Like, you might be someone who thinks, oh, we should have grenade launchers and tanks if we want to. Okay, fine. But then what do you think would stop this? Because nothing is not an appropriate answer. I'm tired. I'm frustrated. Some of these parents had to give DNA samples so they could identify their children. Without getting gratuitous here, you can put together why DNA samples would be needed to identify a child versus the parent looking at that child and saying, that's my child. That's what this type of weapon does. How can you hear that and do absolutely nothing? And again, I don't mean that's number one, certain politicians, but also people in the community. You don't have to be an advocate. You don't have to go out and dedicate your life to this stuff. But if you're someone who just shrugs and thinks this is how life is, there's nothing we can do, shame on you. That is disgusting. All right, moving on. Didn't plan to get so worked up, but just seeing it over these last few days it's so upsetting, and I hate it so much. especially in comparison to the stuff that people act quickly on, as I mentioned before. Speaking of crappy politicians who will do nothing in this scenario, we had the South Carolina first district Republican congressional primary on Monday. There was 3 candidates: incumbent Nancy Mace, her challengers Lynn's Piper Loomis, and Katie Arrington. Were supposed to debate at Burke High School, which, by the way, is not in District 1, so that was weird enough as it was. And during the first question went to Lynn's Piper Loomis. She answered by saying that she was dropping out of the race and endorsing Katie Arrington. Took off her mic and walked off the stage. So this whole circus. Well, she had a fundraiser like 2 days before or something like that. Did she just decide willy-nilly, I'm just going to quit? No, of course not. This was orchestrated and likely was related to the Arrington campaign. Now, that was the rumor. That's what a lot of people thought. Sure enough, Post and Courier had an article that came out that mentioned that Katie Arrington reportedly approached Piper Loomis at least 5 times to get out of the race. There was a discussion on May 12th where she told the media that Arrington had offered to create a job for her involving sex trafficking and border security, which were Piper Loomis's kind of like pet projects and, things that she was really focused on. So this is what Piper Loomis said to the press back on May 12th, probably when she had no intentions of dropping out and was trying to make Arrington look bad. Like, hey, she's trying to bribe me out of this race. She's scared of me or whatever, but then ends up dropping out of the race. And then when she was asked for additional comment by the Post and Courier, Piper Loomis denied that there was an exchange for her departure and claimed that she and Arrington never discussed putting her on the campaign payroll. There was no money, no specific jobs were talked about. Less than 10 days ago, you said literally all of that was happening. Well, not all of it, but you were offered roles with this campaign if you would drop out. And now all of a sudden, oh no, I just decided to do it on my own because I wasn't polling well. That's what she said. She said her and Arrington are very similar, and that she was not polling well, so she decided to drop out. BS. I'm calling BS because 1, she already, like I said, 10 days ago, already said what was really happening. And 2, why do you wait until you're on the stage? You don't just do that. A lot of these people who run for office, this gets a little testy between these candidates. The last thing candidates probably want to do is on stage drop out in the first question to endorse the other candidate. What is the point of that? It's pretty clear that this was all for show, and what a mess. The rest of the debate is not really important. It's what you expect it to be in these primary debates. And this goes for the Democrat side, too. We don't have a debate because Annie Andrews is the only candidate. But I'm sure she'll debate whoever wins the Republican side. But this happens all the time in primary debates. They're talking to that specific base. So they're not too worried about the other side. They're busy trying to make sure that they win the nomination for their party. So this is to be expected, but the majority of it was talking about who Trump endorsed and didn't endorse, who really supports America first and all the Trump policies and, stuff like that. It's just, how terrible Biden is and the liberal Democrats are ruining this country, all that kind of stuff. So there really wasn't anything of substance that came out of this debate besides, like I said at the beginning. So you really didn't miss out. But one other thing I noticed was that there was people in the audience and there was a lot of yelling, there's clapping and stuff after answers, but people were yelling out stuff and heckling. And most of the hecklers, from what I could tell from the live stream, were men, although there were some women heckling as well. But the vast majority sounded like men's voices heckling it turned out to be 2 women candidates on the stage, but just heckling and booing, and it just was bizarre. And to the candidates' credit, they kept their cool. They didn't say anything to the audience. They didn't, get tripped up by that or anything like that. So to their credit, they did remain cool, and which cannot be an easy scenario where you're just trying to get your political points out. And you got people yelling stuff from the audience, but just a circus to start. And we knew this race from primaries to the general is going to be a circus, and it did not disappoint from that assumption. So that is what happened at the debate for the Republican primary for District 1. So we got all that. I want to end on good news before we get to the interview, which is also good. South Carolina lawmakers have banned sub-minimum wages for people with disabilities. This is good. This is a bill that ends the practice of paying sub-minimal wages for people with disabilities. So what that means is exactly what it sounds like. Whatever minimum wages, there are circumstances where legally companies, businesses, whatever, could pay someone with a disability less money. That is going to be no more. It's going to become law in South Carolina, which ensures the estimated Post and Courier estimate over 1 million people would fall under this disability category. Now those folks can be paid appropriately. One such instance, just to kind of give you an idea, currently, according to the Post and Courier, there's an estimated 1,000 state residents that currently work in what is called a sheltered workshop, which is where people with disabilities are paid below the federal minimum wage. So the U.S. Social Security Administration defines a sheltered workshop as a private, nonprofit, state, or local government institution that provides employment opportunities for individuals who are developmentally, physically, or mentally impaired to help them prepare for gainful work in the general economy. Under these new provisions, agencies will have that are currently paying below the minimum wage will be given 3 years to phase out of those contracts. So good news, these folks deserve to be paid the same wage as anybody else. They're doing work, they're helping, they're taking part in the community, and doing what we all do. And I'm sure there was good intentions with some of these things where it was just trying to get them some experience without, um, taking up too much payroll or something like that. I'm sure they had good intentions, but I'm glad to see that now this state is finally doing away with that, and these folks can be paid at least minimum wage, just like anybody else. It's about equality, and that is good. So I was happy to see that, and that's nice that we've had a couple of good pieces of legislation now 2 weeks in a row, which is abnormal. Actually, just thinking, I wasn't even planning on talking about this now, but there was another piece of legislation that I also think is good, which is about birth control. Governor Henry McMaster recently signed a bill that expands women's access to birth control in South Carolina. Color me surprised. Did not think McMaster would sign any kind of legislation like this. So glad that he did, but he signed that into law on May 23rd, which means birth control pills will soon be available in South Carolina without a prescription under this new bipartisan legislation. Especially, I mean, this is great anyway, but especially given where we are probably heading with Roe v. Wade. If that does get overturned, South Carolina will, in all likelihood, ban, if not all abortions, most. So this is a good thing. People won't need a prescription. They won't need to go to a doctor. Women can get birth control pills that they need, which will help, of course, prevent unwanted pregnancies. We've talked about this a couple times. If you want to stop abortions, number one, you're never going to stop it completely, but there's better ways to do it than these abortion bans that cause more harm. And this is not just me giving commentary. This is based on studies, other countries, and things that have happened. There are so many other ways to prevent unwanted pregnancies and make sure that people don't have to decide if they need to get an abortion or not. So this is a good move. Will certainly help out for folks who weren't previously able to get birth control pills without a prescription. Obviously, so much more to go. McMaster said, quote, "If South Carolina wants to be a pro-life state, we must provide the means for people to avoid unwanted pregnancies," end quote. And for once, yes, I agree with McMaster. We've seen other people in other states that do not have that position. There are some people, believe it or not, legislatures, governors that think birth control should be banned. They think that is like a form of abortion, basically. So pleasantly surprised that McMaster did not hold that position and did that. So credit where credit is due, although he is still a terrible governor for so many other reasons. So but good job on that one, buddy. You got one. So some good pieces of legislation that are getting passed here, providing just a tiny, tiny little glimmer of hope that humanity is not completely ruined, especially in this state. With that, we are going to move on. We've got an awesome interview. Affordable housing is a huge issue in this country. If you spend any time online in Charleston or talking to people in Charleston, affordable housing will come up at some point, because especially downtown, we have so many food and bev and hotel jobs, and people complaining about not being able to find affordable housing, having to live with a ton of people to make rent, et cetera, et cetera. This is not anything that you are unfamiliar with. but I think it is important to know what the city is doing. And the Charleston Housing Authority is an organization that works to have affordable housing for people in this community. So I'm happy that Art Milligan, the president and CEO, was able to speak with me today so we can learn about what they are doing, what's coming down the pike as far as plans and things they're working on, so we can have a better idea of what exactly is happening. So I found this chat really, really valuable, and I think you will too. So without any further delay, here is the interview. And joining me now is my guest, Art Milligan, the president and CEO of the Charleston Housing Authority. You actually took over this role back on January 1st, but have had over 30 years of experience. So I'm excited to hear about your background and what you're doing here in Charleston. Art, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you.
No problem. So let's get started with you. What is your background? Not necessarily just your work background, but also, where you came from, how you ended up in Charleston.
Yeah. Well, I'm originally was born in Columbia, South Carolina. I went to Eau Claire High School there and played football. I left Eau Claire and got an academic scholarship to go to the Citadel, which brought me to Charleston, and I'm a class of 79 from the Citadel, and I left there and went to work for a textile company as an industrial engineer, and bounced around in that industry for a little while, and then started working at, I stopped and got an MBA from Wake Forest. I was going to skip that, and then stopped and got into the public housing arena. Started with the Housing Authority in North Carolina, then went Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and then went to Winston-Salem, and later on to Tampa. And then started to get back into the private sector, and I became a partner with couple different companies where I was leading their property management for the private side. Few years ago, or I guess now a year ago or so, because I got out of the business and was out for 20 years or so, Don Cameron called me and asked me would I be interested in talking to him about his opening for a chief operating officer. And I did, and it worked out. I came here in April of 2021. And after a short time being here, Don determined he was going to retire. And the board chose me as his replacement, which I started January 1.
Nice. And, so you've got a few months in here as in your current role, and obviously had been with the Housing Authority prior to that. If you could, just provide for those who don't know exactly what it is the Charleston Housing Authority does, like just a little bit of a background and an overview of what you all set out to do.
Okay. All right. Well, public housing began in 1937, which the Congress decided that because after the Depression, there was such a need for people to have housing because there were actually people outside because of the Great Depression, that they decided that they put money into allowing people to move into places that were affordable, that they could get, even though they were making very little money, if any. And it caught hold and went across the country. Charleston was one of the housing authorities that had units even prior to the actual law being made into law. In 1937, there were very few built, but Robert Mills was built about 1936 here in Charleston. So the idea took off and went across the country, and Charleston, being the city that it is, followed lead, and we have 1,400 units now of public housing here, as well as later on in the 70s, the Section 8 program occurred, which allowed people to take a voucher and move to anywhere they wanted to into a regular apartment, but HUD would pay the difference between the 30% and what was actually paid for the rent. And we have 1,600 of those vouchers that are currently in action here in Charleston. So, and not to mention we have some workforce housing that is not actually public housing, but is in the 60% of the AMI. So that gives us around 3,000 plus units that we have in here of affordable housing.
Thank you for that background. I think a lot of people don't realize how much the affordable housing is out there. You know, they see headlines about affordable housing, and they don't realize, you know, how much is actually out there, including, like you said, the workforce as well. You know, this isn't affordable housing is a topic of conversation in multiple states, but specifically here, South Carolina, and of course the Charleston region. What is the field like for affordable housing, and are there any particular challenges that you see here in this region?
Well, there are some challenges, and I think the great thing about Charleston is that they are at least realizing that it's a problem, and have realized it for a while. So that is the reason why we have the units we have in public housing, because people were open to that idea. There's a lot of places where everybody's just realizing that as we're going into the swing that we have been in now with the economy and so forth. But, you know, Charleston haven't realized that it is on the agenda of most of the governments, city governments, state governments, as well as the legislators to try to increase affordable housing. And it's been a problem because, you know, there are places right now that are having difficulty with it. They've got a lot of management people and a lot of very educated people that can do great work, and they're coming here in Charleston and Groves. But, you know, if you have a restaurant, you got to have people to wash the dishes and cook the food. And if you have hotels, you have to have people that will, you know, do the laundry, etc. And the individuals that do those sort of things that are making the close to the minimum wage need to have housing that they can go to, and usually housing that they can walk to. And with what's going on in Charleston now with the influx of people, that's a very difficult thing. And there are restaurants now, since I've been here, and I've only been here a little over a year, that are shutting down because they don't have anybody to wash the dishes or clean the floors.
Right, right.
And so that is going to impact all of us.
Absolutely. Yeah, that affordable housing, as you were well aware, very much on the minds of people here, particularly on the peninsula, for the reasons you just mentioned. You know, people want to work closely to where their job is, and it's tough if they can't afford it. Now,
Right.
there are a couple programs that the Housing Authority has. The first one, if you could, tell me a little bit about the Housing Authority's RAD program, RAD. For those listening, it stands for Rental Assistance Demonstration.
Right. Well, the RAD program is HUD's attempt to deal with the whole housing program a little differently, and that what they're trying to do is create an opportunity for most of the units that are older now. Like I said, we have units in our city in Charleston that were built in 1937 that are still there that need major renovation, and this program allows for us to be able to either do full rehab on the units or to, in fact, to reposition them. And that's the same thing as tearing them down and rebuilding and building new units. And what we will do is we will then take the new units, and the residents that are currently in those units will be asked, as we tear down units, to relocate temporarily, and we'll give them a Section 8 voucher that will help pay their rent for where they are. Once the units have been fully rebuilt, they'll have the opportunity to come back to those units. And if they choose to stay, they can. If they choose not to stay or stay where they are with that voucher, they'll be able to do that. And we'll put a new voucher in for the next person to come in. So in I guess in short term, we're going to go through the whole portfolio we have, and this is being done all across the country, and either make a determination to rehab units or rebuild them and build units up to the specs that meets today. Because again, if you got a building that's built in 1936, but there's a mandate to put air conditioning in, well, you got walls that are built out of concrete and rock, and you put air conditioning in, and you get mold and you get mildew and those kinds of things. So there's a need to have all these units brought up to date so that the residents that are there will have the same life that everybody else has. So, in that respect, in a few years, most of its portfolio, HUD's portfolio, will have been changed to newer or rehab units.
So it sounds like not just finding or providing having affordable housing, but making sure, not just like whatever you can find, and making sure that these folks have good housing, everything's up to code, and they're getting the same types of things everybody else in the community does. It's not just some old building like, oh yeah, you can go live there, it's cheap because it's not in good shape. You're making sure that it's up to date, but also keeping the cost down.
Exactly.
And one of those programs, I think this is probably part of it. The one I'm familiar with is the 275 Hugie Street project,
Right.
which I think was the plan was to demolish what was a 12 apartment complex, which was already for low income tenants on the peninsula, and then build 85 apartments in its place, which would still be affordable housing. Is that kind of the overview of it? And if so, what's the update on that project?
Well, the update is we've looked at the project, and it'll be more like 77 units now. Mainly because we're having and as you start planning, you go along with the need for to provide the space for units, the fire units and so forth, and police to be able to come in. So it's cut back some of the number of units I have, but the 12 units that will come back, those individuals will have the vouchers that I told you about.
Right.
That they'll have the vouchers and be able to come back and move into that space. The other units will be for people who meet 50 to 60% of the AMI, which is again policemen, teachers, etc. That are in that pay range, and so it's still affordable housing. It just won't be low income housing. But the 12 who left will have the opportunity to come back with a voucher, and we're hoping to be able to break ground within another year in that program.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, and that's pretty incredible to go from 12, even though it's a little bit lower than originally thought. 77 units in comparison to 12 is pretty great. That's
Right.
A lot of units for people who could use them. So that's I'm glad to hear that project is still going and about a year away, which is good news for sure.
Well, I have to say my board and the mayor and the individuals that support him are very adamant on trying to increase affordable housing. So we've been, given a clear notice that we need to at all times try to increase affordable housing here in Charleston.
Yeah, it's good to hear. I had the mayor on about a year ago, and we did talk about affordable housing. He mentioned some of these things and his dedication to it, and it's definitely something people here in Charleston are worried about and concerned about. So I'm glad, there's a lot of work being done. And I think he mentioned, I don't know if this falls under, what you do, but he had mentioned that any of these new apartment complexes that are being built, if they're approved, they either had to pay I think it was like a fee basically if they didn't provide a certain section for affordable housing, and then that would go to like a fund, or
Right.
if they could build in certain rooms or spaces, that would be a little bit cheaper. Does that fall under your purview?
Well, it's not under my purview, but I'm fully aware of it because some of those units, some of those developments will use Section 8 vouchers, which allows them to make that accommodation.
Okay, gotcha. And you mentioned a couple times the AMI, and that we're referencing to the workforce housing, which for those who don't know, my understanding with that is if the amount of money that a certain individual or a household makes falls under a certain threshold, they can live in some of these places with cheaper rent than what would normally be, for other folks. Is that essentially how that breaks down?
Exactly. That average medium income, and they take whatever the average median income every year and determine individuals who are below or are in need of affordable housing. If there's 60% of that number or less, then they get the opportunity to move in some of these apartments that are built using state tax credits, state government money, and federal tax credits to build, which is what we're going to be doing with the Hugie Street, using tax credits to build the units, which is basically a subsidy. So we're able to take the lower rent and still be able to fund the things that need to be funded to keep the unit in good shape.
In this discussion, it always comes up. You'll hear it. I know you hear it. or see it online. People will say certain things about affordable housing and what's happening and their opinions. What are some of the common misconceptions that you see and hear about in regards to affordable housing, specifically here in Charleston?
Well, you always hear that people don't want to work, and again, that's a misnomer because a lot of people do work
Mm.
that are in public housing, and again, we charge 30% of their income, their adjusted income, as rent. So there are people who actually are paying $800 and $900 living in affordable housing. But that's again a misnomer because I think a lot of people don't work and are not doing anything, and that's a misnomer. That there's a lot of people, and there are a lot of families
Mm.
that live in public housing who, and have one of the spouses works and the other one takes care of the children, etc. So that's somehow, the stigma that people believe is just, a bunch of mothers who have children who are not working, and that's not the case.
Yeah, I've certainly seen that. And, I've also seen on the other end people talk about, oh, the city's not doing enough or the city doesn't care. And obviously, hearing you talk about the projects and the things like that and how the mayor says he's dedicated to it, that doesn't seem to be the case at all. These things take time. So I know, there are plans in place and it takes some time. So I see a lot of comments like that. What would you say to people who make comments like that?
Well, I just say that they're probably not informed,
Mm.
because if they get informed and get involved, then they'll know the number of efforts that are being made. And in Charleston, there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of things to help people with the need affordable housing. Everything from helping with daycare to educating people to helping people get jobs. And so the people that say that, again, maybe, living their life and they're not really aware of what all is being done by, their politicians,
Mm.
by the number of businesses that they're doing. The Chamber of Commerce here in Charleston is, doing a lot of different things of educating and working with people that are needing affordable housing. So, again, there are a lot of people that say those things, and they're not really educated as to what's going on, and then they go to work and they don't think anything else about it. Where, again, the reality of it is that there's a lot of people in government and in the private sector in Charleston that are determined to try to change the trend we're on.
Yeah, and hopefully, things like this, interviews and having you on the show, this will help clear up some of those, so people know what's going on, and then they'll be more informed and, can base their opinions, now that they have some more information. So hopefully this will help. And for those listening, I don't even know necessarily if there is something specific the public can do, but is there anything the public can do to help you and the Housing Authority in making sure that you guys can continue to do your job appropriately? Is there anything they can do? I know it's a little different, than if this was like a nonprofit or something where people could donate money. But is there anything they can do to make sure that these, your projects move forward and that the types of things that you have goals for get done?
Well, I think they can volunteer and to their churches, the different groups, different organizations, United Way, and a number of different organizations that are doing things to help, people that are in need. And it's not, all of it ties together because it's not just people that don't have jobs. You've got people that have all kind of other kind of problems. There's mental health problems that cause people to be in a position where they need affordable housing.
Mm.
There's illnesses that elderly have that do cause the same, and youth. So, anybody that's willing to volunteer and get involved with, things like the March of Dimes, United Way, the different schools and the different churches that are doing things, excuse me, those kinds of things would help, and not only help financially, but help with getting to see people and see what's really going on out there as opposed to what, they get from a glimpse.
Sure. For those who are listening, we talked about, misconceptions and being uninformed and not having all the details. What's the best way for people to learn more about affordable housing in Charleston, about the Charleston Housing Authority, and just become more well-versed in this topic?
Well, there's a number of places that you can go to learn at. First of all, Post and Courier does a pretty good job of covering all those kinds of things. And if they read the paper, they'll see the different organizations and different things that are being done with from the politics and the city government, county government, to the number of organizations that are working to help provide affordable housing. So educating themselves by, reading the Post and Courier and the other other things through the medium of social media will help too. Not to mention if they just go on Google and look and see what things are available out there. We have a website on ourselves that you can see the activities we're going through that can be taken to. The city has a really strong website of the activities that they're doing with affordable housing. So again, besides getting out and getting involved, they can get on their computer and just go through and see what's done when they put in affordable housing and what efforts are being made.
Yeah, I think that's all, good recommendations. Education is key to everything. So learning about a topic and an issue, making sure you have all the facts and know what's going on will, help folks be able to help out in a better way than if they, go in blindly. So I think that's all very good. And is there anything that we haven't talked about, whether it's affordable housing or just Charleston Housing Authority, that you want the public to know? Any other projects, anything else going on that we didn't touch on?
No, I think you covered pretty well. The RAD is the biggest thing that we've got going on, and we're doing some real reach out to our residents to see, what we can do to make life pleasant for them and make it easier. So those are the biggest things that are going on right now.
All right. Well, that's great. Thank you for the work that you're doing in this community. I know affordable housing is on a lot of folks' minds, so I appreciate the work you and the Housing Authority are doing to help out people in our community, and I appreciate you speaking with me today. So Art Milligan, CEO and President of the Charleston Housing Authority, thanks so much for stopping by today. And that is it. Thank you again to Art Milligan, CEO and President of the Charleston Housing Authority. Like I said before, I think there's a lot of good information in there. Hopefully, you all can take that and go out in the community and figure out ways that we can continue to push for these types of things to happen. And you're just armed with a little bit more information so we can make the city better for everybody. Thanks so much for listening. Always honored and happy to be back doing the show. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins of LMC Sound System and FMB Radio for producing each and every episode. Thank you to Tyler Boone of Boone's Bourbon, which continues to win awards and do amazing things, but he's also first and foremost an amazing musician. So thank you to him for providing the music that you hear in every single episode. If you want to help out, you can rate and review, subscribe to this podcast. You can also share it with folks you think may find it interesting. You can also go to patreon.com/holycitycenter and sign up there to be a Patreon subscriber. You can also buy merchandise on holycitycenter.com/shop. And as always, share, likes, retweets, all those good stuff. Follows always help get the Holy City Sitter name out there, and I really appreciate it. So until next time, I hope this week is better, locally, nationally, globally, than it's been lately. Even if I don't have high expectations of that, we got to keep the faith and hope things get better and keep working towards a better community. And I appreciate all of you who are a very good community for me. So I appreciate you all. And until then, good night and good luck.